Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. If you ever want me, I'm here. I haven't lived here mad and all alone for 25 years to be scared by. You shall pay for this, you shall pay for this. And so saying, the misshapen little demon set up a yell, and danced upon the ground as if wild with rage. Stupid enough this, muttered the doctor to himself. The boy must have made a mistake. Here, put that in your pocket and shut yourself up again. With these words, he flung the hunchback a piece of money and returned to the carriage. The man followed to the chariot door, uttering the wildest imprecations and curses all the way. But as Mr. Losberne turned to speak to the driver, he looked into the carriage and eyed Oliver for an instant with a glance so sharp and fierce and at the same time so furious and vindictive, that, waking or sleeping, he could not forget it for months afterwards. He continued to utter the most fearful imprecations until the driver had resumed his seat. And when they were once more on their way, they could see him some distance behind, beating his feet upon the ground and tearing his hair, in transports of real or pretended rage. "I'm an ass," said the doctor, after a long silence. "Did you know that before, Oliver?" "No, sir." "Then don't forget it another time." "An ass," said the doctor, after a further silence of some minutes. "Even if it had been the right place and the right fellows had been there, what could I have done single-handed? And if I had had assistance, I see no good that I should have done, except leading to my own exposure, and an unavoidable statement of the manner in which I have hushed up this business that would have served me right, though. I am always involving myself in some scrape or other, by acting on impulse. It might have done me good." Now, the fact was that the excellent doctor had never acted upon anything but impulse all through his life, and if no bad compliment to the nature of the impulses which governed him, that so far from being involved in any peculiar troubles or misfortunes, he had the warmest respect and esteem of all who knew him. If the truth must be told, he was a little out of temper, for a minute or two, at being disappointed in procuring corroborative evidence of Oliver's story on the very first occasion on which he had a chance of obtaining any. He soon came round again, however, and finding that Oliver's replies to his questions were still as straightforward and consistent, and still delivered with as much apparent sincerity and truth, as they had ever been, he made up his mind to attach full credence to them from that time forth. As Oliver knew the name of the street in which Mr. Brownlow resided, they were enabled to drive straight thither. When the coach turned into it, his heart beat so violently that he could scarcely draw his breath. "Now, my boy, which house is it?" inquired Mr. Losberne. That," replied Oliver, pointing eagerly out of the window. "The White House. Oh, make haste, pray make haste. I feel as if I should die, it makes me tremble so." Come," said the good doctor, patting him on the shoulder. "You will see them directly, and they will be overjoyed to find you safe and well." "Oh, I hope so," cried Oliver. "They were so good to me, so very, very good to me." The coach rolled on. It stopped. No, that was the wrong house. The next door. It went on a few paces and stopped again. Oliver looked up at the windows, with tears of happy expectation coursing down his face. Alas, the White House was empty, and there was a bill in the window, "To let." "Knock at the door," cried Mr. Losberne, taking Oliver's arm in his. "What has become of Mr. Brownlow, who used to live in the adjoining house? Do you know?" The servant did not know, but would go and inquire. She presently returned and said that Mr. Brownlow had sold off his goods and gone to the West Indies 6 weeks before. Oliver clasped his hands and sank feebly backward. "Has his housekeeper gone too?" inquired Mr. Losberne, after a moment's pause. Yes, sir, replied the servant. The old gentleman, the housekeeper, and a gentleman who was a friend of Mr. Brownlow's all went together. Then turn towards home again, said Mr. Losberne to the driver, and don't stop to bait the horses till you get out of this confounded London. The bookstall keeper, sir? Said Oliver. I know the way there. See him? Pray, sir. Do see him. My poor boy, this is disappointment enough for one day, said the doctor. Quite enough for both of us. If we go to the bookstall keeper's, we shall certainly find that he is dead, or he has set his house on fire or run away. No, home again straight. And in obedience to the doctor's impulse, home they went. This bitter disappointment caused Oliver much sorrow and grief, even in the midst of his happiness, for he had pleased himself many times during his illness with thinking of all that Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Bedwin would say to him, and what delight it would be to tell him how many long days and nights he had passed in reflecting on what they had done for him, and in bewailing his cruel separation from them. The hope of eventually clearing himself with them too, and explaining how he had been forced away, had buoyed him up, and sustained him under many of his recent trials. And now, the idea that they should have gone so far, and carried with them the belief that there was an impostor and a robber, a belief which might remain uncontradicted to his dying day, was almost more than he could bear. The circumstance occasioned no alteration, however, in the behavior of his benefactors, after another fortnight when the fine warm weather had fairly begun, and every tree in flower was putting forth its young leaves and rich blossoms. They made preparations for quitting the house at Chertsey for some months. Sending the plate which had so excited Fagin's cupidity to the bankers, and leaving Giles and another servant in care of the house, they departed to a cottage at some distance in the country, and took Oliver with them. Who can describe the pleasure and delight, the peace of mind and soft tranquillity, the sickly boy felt in the balmy air, and among the green hills and rich woods of an inland village? Who can tell how scenes of peace and quietude sank into the minds of pain-worn dwellers in close and noisy places, and carried their own freshness deep into their jaded hearts? Men who have lived in crowded, pent-up streets through lives of toil, and who have never wished for change. Men to whom custom has indeed been second nature, and who have come almost to love each brick and stone that form the narrow boundaries of their daily walks. Even they, with the hand of death upon them, have been known to yearn at last for one short glimpse of nature's face, and, carried far from the scenes of their old pains and pleasures, have seemed to pass at once into a new state of being, crawling forth from day to day to some green sunny spot. They have had such memories wakened up within them by the sight of the sky, and hill and plain, and glistening water, that a foretaste of heaven itself has soothed their quick decline. And they have sunk into their tombs as peacefully as the sun whose setting they watched from their lonely chamber window but a few hours before, faded from their dim and feeble sight. The memories which peaceful country scenes call up are not of this world, nor of its thoughts and hopes. Their gentle influence may teach us how to weave fresh garlands for the graves of those we loved, may purify our thoughts, and bear down before it old enmity and hatred. But beneath all this there lingers in the least reflective mind a vague and half-formed consciousness of having held such feelings long before, in some remote and distant time, which calls up solemn thoughts of distant times to come, and bends down pride and worldliness beneath it. It was a lovely spot to which they repaired. Oliver, whose days had been spent among squalid crowds and in the midst of noise and brawling, seemed to enter on a new existence there. The rose and honeysuckle clung to the cottage walls, the ivy crept round the trunks of the trees, and the garden flowers perfumed the air with delicious odors. Hard by was a little churchyard, not crowded with tall, unsightly gravestones, but full of humble mounds, covered with fresh turf and moss, beneath which the old people of the village lay at rest. Oliver often wandered here, and thinking of the wretched grave in which his mother lay, would sometimes sit him down and sob unseen. But when he raised his eyes to the deep sky overhead, he would cease to think of her as lying in the ground and would weep for her, sadly, but without pain. And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.